Good evening. This is The Report with me, John Rees. On tonight's programme, we'll be taking a look at the unfolding crisis in Yemen. But first, 3 students have been shot dead in the US state of North Carolina. They were all Muslims, and the killing took place last night. It took more than a day for it to hit the news headlines. The cold-blooded killings by a man who described himself as an anti-theist barely made the media headlines until an outpouring of grief and anger overwhelmed social media. Sarah Say has more on this.
A man has been arrested and charged with fatally shooting 3 Muslim students near the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill campus yesterday. The victims were 23-year-old Dia Shadi Barakat, his wife 21-year-old Yusra Muhammad, and her sister 19-year-old Razan Muhammad Abu Salah. 46-year-old Craig Stephen Hicks of Chapel Hill was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Soon after the incident, Barakat's father was seen pleading with police to tell him what had happened.
You do whatever, I'm not staying here. I'm going to go in there and see what's going on, sir.
Police responded to a report of gunshots at around 5 p.m. local time, which is around 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and found 3 victims who were all pronounced dead at the scene.
I'm kind of in shock. I'm really confused, and I have been since 5:30.
The police have offered no motive for the killings, although the suspect described himself as an anti-theist and criticised all religions online. The university said that Barakat was a second-year student at its dentistry school. His wife was planning on starting there in the fall, while her sister was a student at North Carolina State University. US and Western media were slow to respond to the news, with only a few starting to cover the story as late as 14 hours after the incident. But directly following the shooting, the hashtag Chapel Hill shooting went viral, with many of the tweets criticising the media for not covering the shooting. Today, the hashtag Muslim Lives Matter has also been trending nationally on Twitter, with some postings comparing the shooting to the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris last month, while others called on Barack Obama and senior religious figures to condemn the attacks. An American football and basketball fan, Barakat also volunteered with a charity providing emergency dental care to children in Palestine. He regularly posted on Twitter and wrote in January, "It's so sad to hear people saying we should kill Jews or kill Palestinians, as if that's going to solve anything."
Well, joining us to discuss this is Harris Tarin, who's Director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council based in Washington and Los Angeles, and US scholar Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Harris, what is the atmosphere like now? Because we're used to stories where Muslims are terrorists, and there is an automatic context into which that fits, but this doesn't. So what's the atmosphere like now?
Well, I think the atmosphere, to a large extent, is full of fear and confusion. These were 3 young people who were beautiful souls and who were committed to their community, their faith, and their country, and their lives have senselessly been taken from them. This shows us, this really highlights the fact that the rhetoric that is currently taking place in certain quarters of our media and political sphere does not go without consequence. And I'm sure we'll be waiting for final facts to come from law enforcement agencies, but we've seen over the past decade that every time there's been a political and media campaign where rhetoric has been heightened, we've seen a correlation with hate crimes and hate violence. And for that, that is something that must give us pause as a community and as a nation, and we must reflect on this fact that we cannot blame and identify one group of individuals for violence and terrorism. As this individual who was an atheist and had a very strong anti-theist remarks on his social media pages, we can't blame all atheists. So that same concept applies to Muslims, and unfortunately, we have not lived to that consistency thus far.
Dr. Qadhi, that's the problem, isn't it? That in this case, people will say, no, of course, even if this person turns out to be as politically motivated as he seems to be by a sort of anti-theist ideology of some sort, people will say, no, you can't blame all atheists for that. But they don't say this in the wake of cases where Muslims were involved.
See, that's exactly the point. There's a narrative here where one sympathizes with one's own, one understands one's own problems and terrorists. But when another group might have a lone wolf, might have a terrorist attack, the entire group is smeared. I mean, I'm sitting in America here right now, and neither CNN nor Fox nor any other mainstream network has really honed in on this and reported it 24/7 as they reported, let's say, the France incident or any other incident. All we need to do is ask the question, imagine if the situation was reversed. Imagine if a bearded Muslim, entered into an apartment complex and seemed to just appear to be religiously motivated and killed 3 non-Muslims. How would the spin, have taken place? How would the media have portrayed that event? And the exact opposite has taken place, and there's a deafening silence. And that's really not only have these lies been lost, but the double standards, the hypocrisy is really screaming at us in the face. And that even makes it worse, that this narrative is only going to spew more hatred and cause more Islamophobia.
So we're relying now, Harris, on material that's coming out about things that were on the killer's website for his links to anti-theist and atheist beliefs. Is there anything more emerging about his political or ideological background in the States yet?
Well, I think we're still waiting for that information. So far, we've just seen social media posts. We've seen pictures and statements that he's made against people of all faiths. But I think the broader picture is important to put into perspective at this point, that we are functioning in an environment that is not very healthy towards American Muslims, especially when we saw films like The American Sniper come out. And, that film, there was people coming out of movie theaters and actually said that, my blood is boiling and I feel like shooting a Muslim. Those comments were made on social media. Those were the type of things that we were hearing. And what we ask right now for public officials, law enforcement authorities, to be extremely vigilant in addressing this issue. We've already sent requests into the government, to very high level government officials, to come out very forcefully on this issue. There is no room to play with the lives of a community, and we see the consequences. We see the tragic loss of lives of 3 beautiful young people who were serving their community and country.
Dr. Qadhi, there was an interesting moment a couple of days ago when President Obama made a statement saying, at a prayer breakfast, I believe indeed, saying that Christians should get off their high horse about the sort of supposed superiority of the Christian religion and the criticism of Islam. That was remarkable because it went against the trend here, wasn't it?
Well, it was. I mean, despite my other disagreements with the president on a number of issues, I have to say that was a positive light where he actually pointed out every religion has and has had in the past plenty of weirdos and fringe lunatics. And the fact of the matter is that Christianity has had very violent episodes in its own history. And for them to be ignoring that and then claiming that we are only the only group that has produced terrorism or violence in the name of religion, that is extremely infantile. That's extremely incorrect. And then, of course, the main point is the political and the socioeconomic grievances are always sidelined, always ignored. It's never a matter of why there's so much anger, why there's so much backlash and grievances. It's always about they're doing it seemingly out of the blue, seemingly out of a vacuum. And that's, of course, simply not true.
Harris, is there something to be learnt from the phraseology here? Because I think, as we've already mentioned, what the killer said was that he, was hostile to all religions. And we heard this in defence of Charlie Hebdo. It was said they were critical of all religions. But the fact of the matter is he went out and killed Muslims, not Jews or Christians.
Right. Yeah, I mean, context is extremely important. You've got people like Bill Maher and Sam Harris and others who will say that, we are critical of all religions, and they may be critical of all religions. And Bill Maher has been critical of Christianity and Judaism in the past. But current context is extremely important. The current environment, when we talk about violence and faith, it does not refer to Christians. It does not refer to Jews. It does not refer to Buddhists or Hindus. We are referring to Muslims, unfortunately. And so when we say that, we may make disclaimers to ensure that people don't blame us. But the rhetoric, when talking about faith and violence currently, is pointed towards Muslims. And I think that's where we need to take a step back and say, if we continue on this path, it's going to be a destructive path. We've seen this. We've seen this before. It's very difficult to control the mob once we unleash the rhetoric. And it's difficult even for law enforcement agencies, and it's difficult for government agencies. We've seen it happen over and over in our history in the U.S., and it's important for us to understand that the rhetoric is tied to action a lot of times. And so phraseology is important, but any reference at this point to religion and violence points straight to Muslims, unfortunately.
Dr. Qadhi, what is the atmosphere like now? Will this give people pause for thought? Could there be a moment where, however horrific and tragic these deaths are, they at least serve the purpose of getting people to stand back and look at some of the atmosphere that's been built up?
That is exactly one would hope for, that at least these three beautiful young lives haven't been totally gone for lost. We hope some type of retrospect, some type of introspect in terms of the rhetoric does develop. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening. And the fact of the matter is that mainly it's Muslims on social media raising public awareness and not the mainstream news channels. Let us not ignore that barely 3 weeks ago, one of Fox News hosts, Judge Jeanine Pirro, quite blatantly and explicitly said that we should kill them, we should kill them all. And then a little afterwards, she goes, well, we mean radical Islam. But the damage has been done. The context is we need to go kill them. And she repeats this 2 or 3 times, and this clip has gone viral. Unfortunately, we don't see that type of retraction. We don't see the guilt or the apology that, look, we shouldn't be spreading this type of rhetoric on the largest news media, on people that unfortunately do believe in the right to carry arms everywhere they go. They're a little bit sensitive about, their gun rights. We're living in a climate, honestly, of fear now, Muslims in America, and I'm scared for myself and my children. I have to say, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and I cannot even begin to imagine how the gentleman who lost his 2 daughters, I don't know the name of the father, how he must be feeling. I mean, it's just a devastating tragedy.
Dr. Qadhi, I take your point about Fox News, but Fox News is kind of out on a limb here. I mean, they probably think that North Carolina is somewhere in Alaska. But the mainstream, the sort of more reputable news networks, are they not catching up with things yet in the States?
Well, firstly, let me clarify. Unfortunately, Fox News is the most watched television station in North America.
Indeed.
That is terrifying for people like me. So, of course, we think it's out on a limb. But to contextualize, most of America does not think Fox News is out on a limb. That's why it's so terrifying. Your second point, has other mainstream media not caught on? Well, in their favor, I logged onto CNN, Huffington Post. These articles are being portrayed on the front page. I even saw a Fox News clip on the website. It's being portrayed somewhere on the front page. However, the actual television stations, the networks, they're not broadcasting 24/7. There's small clips here and there, and I think that's the whole narrative. I remember when the French tragedy took place. Quite literally, for the entire day, if not more, the only news item constantly was that one clip. Why not the other side? Why not we also show that Islamophobia is real, that people get killed when there's this irrational fear of Islam? That is completely absent and silent.
Harris, is there a case now that the only thing that's going to make a serious difference to how all this is taken up and perceived and what happens next is mobilisation by the Muslim community? The hashtag, Muslim Lives Matter is a direct reference to Ferguson and Black Lives Matter. And we might say that what made them matter was protest.
Yeah, it was definitely mobilization is an extremely important part of this. And I was just going to mention that this past weekend I was into a group of churches in upstate New York, which is not in a major city, that's populated by large populations of Muslims. There is a very real misunderstanding of who American Muslims are and what Islam is. And I think that's extremely real. And to be honest, I don't think we as an American Muslim community fully comprehend how real that apprehension and fear sometimes is. And so what needs to happen at this point is we as American Muslims with coalition partners, with various other groups, need to start trying to change that narrative. Because, yes, the vast majority of people are hearing their news from places like Fox News and CNN and on the online, and even through email forwards. But they are willing. I mean, the research shows that they're willing to be changed in terms of their opinions. And I think what we have to do is find mechanisms and ways of addressing it, especially if we're seeing that mainstream media, like Fox News, like CNN, if they're not covering it, we have to find alternative ways. And I think social media is a big aspect of that. So what I think, to ensure that we carry the legacy of these three young, beautiful souls is to not only point out the negativity that exists. Yes, there are huge challenges, as Dr. Qadhi said, especially with outlets like Fox News. But there's also huge opportunities with our fellow Americans, and I think we must take on that mantle now and give people a bit of direction and hope that things can change. I think that's key. We want to make sure that we don't tell the people that there is no hope out there. There's humongous challenges, but there's also enormous opportunity.
Dr. Qadhi, I mean, that's right, isn't it, that there has to be now a demand for change? I mean, it was famously an American radical, Frederick Douglass, who said power concedes nothing without demand. It's about time to start demanding, isn't it?
Exactly. And I do feel, maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but I do feel that the Muslim activism on social media has brought this tragedy to some type of national spotlight. And I feel that if we hadn't done that, that wouldn't have happened. So perhaps there is some light at the end of the tunnel that because of social media, because of Twitter, if you look right now, I'm actually logged on to Twitter, and in the top 10 hashtags, we have Chapel Hill shooting and, hashtag Muslim Lives Matter. I mean, that is at least a ray of hope that Muslims can mobilize social networks, Facebook, Twitter, and of course, put together, we will be able to maybe not substitute the mainstream media, but definitely provide a narrative for those who are interested in listening to that alternative narrative.
Okay, Dr. Yasir Qadhi and Tarin, thanks very much for joining us. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this topic, but do stay for the second part of the show, where we'll be taking a look at the rest of today's news and the top stories that you've been posting on Twitter. And of course, those largely concern the Chapel Hill shootings today. So come back for that after the break.